My name is Flomenhaft, and this is my gallery. And so when I say people can't talk, that's the way it is. This is a very, very proud moment for us. Marcia M.ANNENBERG got an award that is such a fantastic thing. In this book, Origin, she was listed as one of the 100 top creatives in this country. She had an exhibit here, part of the last exhibit, and when she called up NASA and said that she was doing a panel that night, and the head of NASA said, well, I'm going to come, I'm going to talk. Ah, we were waiting for you. I am sorry. Yes, I just started. So this is a very exciting thing for me. My gallery is about 13 years old. It was my 5th career. And it was something that I really wanted to do. I had been a museum director and a curator for shows that have gone to over 60 museums. And I decided that what I wanted to do, since my shows had gone to so many museums, what I wanted to do was have a gallery for artists that I knew the curators were going to love, because if I loved them, they were going to love them. And museums were going to want to show their work. And that's the whole purpose of this gallery, is to choose artists that I feel are at that level and are not household names. So my job is to make them more famous. I don't know if I can sell so many works, but I can make them famous. So one of my artists just had a great show at the Smithsonian, one got a Fulbright Fellowship. Bill DeLevy, whose work is on the side there, is going to have a fantastic show. Where? Coming up? The Ringling Museum of Sarasota. Robert Leslie, whose work you're looking at and is so wonderful. I've known for so many years and been such an admirer, and his book Storm Belt is absolutely sensational. So it would be remiss of me, before we start, to not, since you're surrounded by these wonderful works by these so talented photographers, to not mention that when you have a chance after the talk to walk around, you're going to see something spectacular. I'm also delighted to see Susan LaFleur here, who is also in the show with Marcia M.ANNENBERG, and beautiful abstractionist, and it's a delight to have you here. Now, this is the magazine, Origin, that named our Marcia M.ANNENBERG one of the 100 top creators. And I saw her work at a mixed show of artists, and I fell in love with it immediately, and I thought, she's got to be in my gallery. And she answers questions and makes observations in her art that no one else does. And that's why she's called one of the 100 top creators. She's going to tell you more about why she does it and what she does, and then there's going to be questions. I have many questions for her, but I'm going to save it for after her talk. So now I want to introduce you to this absolutely wonderful artist and wonderful lady, Marcia.
Thank you so much, everyone, for coming. I'm so thrilled to see you all. And you should know that Flomenhaft is an extraordinary person, because there are very, very few gallerists in New York City, or actually in America, who would even think of broaching topics like global warming or the media. And she's so courageous, and she has such integrity, and I feel so blessed and lucky to have met her and to be part of her world. So let's give Ellie a So our topic today is media. What don't we know and why don't we know it? And I want to start talking about my painting, Black Gold. It was done right after 9/11. And if you look at just the art of the painting, it was actually done before I studied the geopolitics of Central Asia. And it was just like a gut feeling. The bottom layer of the painting is done in a style called abstract expressionist, like Pollock. The Twin Towers are done as hard edge painting. The red area on the bottom is a color field painting. The maroon in the middle is pop art style. And what you're left with in the middle has a conceptual edge to it. It's an oil rig, an offshore oil rig. Now, why is that part of the 9/11 story? And that's the question. What came up to my mind? Because if you remember back then, I think we all remember that day, President Bush kept repeating over and over and over and over that bin Laden hates democracy. These people hate democracy. They hate our life. And I thought, like, well, that doesn't sound true. I mean, like, what's the real story? What's really going on? How much could they hate democracy to want to put planes into the World Trade Center? And the absolute frustration was you couldn't read anything anywhere about this movement called Al-Qaeda. You couldn't see his videos. You couldn't get the text of his speeches. It was just impossible. But anyway, I did this painting just on the gut feeling that resources has something to do with this whole situation. And actually the study for this painting is now in the Library of Congress. There's a gallery that's defunct now called Exit Art, and they did an exhibit called Reactions. It was an open call for anyone who wanted to participate in the exhibit. And I sent in the study for this painting. And you know, as I've learned more about Central Asia, the painting becomes worth more and more to me because, well, just to begin from the beginning, I sent away for a book on Amazon for Osama bin Laden's speeches because I just had to know what he was saying. And 1996, declaration of war against the Americans occupying the land of the two holy places. He was enraged that our infidel forces had come into Saudi Arabia to protect Saudi Arabia against Saddam Hussein. Saddam Hussein had gone into Kuwait, and we were afraid he would go into Saudi Arabia. So he stationed our troops in Saudi Arabia for many years. And this infuriated Osama bin Laden to the point of rage. And he talks about that in 1996. In 1998, he published something called the Jihad against Christians and Jews. He hated Israel. He hated the Jews and the Christians working together. He fantasized that Jews and Christians were trying to destroy Muslims, and he calls on Muslims in this document to kill Americans. And the thought I had was like, well, a lot of Muslims are Americans. Does he want Muslims to kill Muslims in America as well as Christians and Jews? I mean, and then that's when you're dealing with someone with a fanatical hatred like this. It colors their whole worldview. The document that was really important to me was a 2002 letter to America. It was released on the internet. And he blames America for the low price of oil. Now, before the year 2000, oil was under $20 a barrel, and he blamed America for stealing the wealth of Saudi Arabia. He says, "You steal our wealth and oil at paltry prices because of your internal influence and military threats. This theft is indeed the biggest theft ever witnessed by mankind in the history of the world." Now, it's a very odd statement because oil is a commodity, and commodities are traded on the world market. It's a fungible commodity because the price of oil depends on supply and demand. So the thought I had was like, why is he blaming America and he's not blaming OPEC? I mean, certainly OPEC has much influence on the price of oil as American demand or Saudi supply. So this is a man filled with hatred, and his worldview is formed by this hatred, whether or not it's accurate or not. So after reading all this stuff, I realized it wasn't really democracy he was against. Well, that is what we were told. That's what the American people understood. He is against our military presence in the Gulf states. He is against our alliance with Israel. He is against the low price of oil, which he blames on us. But what really got me is that after reading all this is, why can't the American people know the truth? Why can't the American people have a discussion about these ideas and accept or reject them? Why do we have to be treated like fourth graders to be told a very, very simple idea? Oh, these people hate democracy, and that's why they did this. They hate us, and we have to get them. It's so simplistic that it's mind-boggling, and it shows a contempt really for the intelligence of the average American, because aren't we capable of reading on our own and coming to our own conclusions without having this information suppressed. And I think it's really a terrible thing. And the media goes along with this. Is anyone here familiar with the country Turkmenistan? Turkmenistan. Turkmenistan has the 4th largest supply of natural gas in the world. Why is that important? It's important because the Taliban were on the verge of signing a contract with an American company called Unocal in 1997. And Unocal was going to build a pipeline from Turkmenistan through Afghanistan into Pakistan. Now this was almost a done deal. As a matter of fact, people don't know that a group from the Taliban actually visited Texas in 1997. George Bush was governor, and they went to visit the home of the vice president of Unocal. His name was Marty Miller, and they were about to sign a deal, a very lucrative deal. At about this time, unfortunately, Osama bin Laden decided to attack our embassies in Kenya and Tanzania, 1998. And I often think, like, why in the world would the Taliban harbor Osama bin Laden if this violent person was out trying to destroy our embassies and installations? Why would they even do that? Like, they were on the verge of signing a contract for this huge oil deal, and they take Osama bin Laden to give him safe refuge. I mean, in the short term, bin Laden gave them a lot of money for weapons and armaments, but in the long term, it was really against their interest to do this. And I was thinking that the Taliban have this code, they're Pashtuns, most of them, called Nana Watai. What is Nana Watai? It's where a host who takes in a visitor must be willing to die for the sake of someone to whom they've given refuge, even if it means they will also be destroyed. It's not something we're familiar with, but it's a code of honor among the Pashtun people. So I thought, like, isn't that amazing? If they hadn't taken him in, very likely this deal would have gone through, and we would have a very different Afghanistan today from the one that we have. To bring us up to date, Unocal was acquired by Chevron in 2005, and a new entity called the Trans-Afghan Pipeline Initiative, which involves Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and India, will run a pipeline in the near future from the gas fields of Turkmenistan through Afghanistan to India. So actually, we are in favor of this. Pipelines have very strategic importance in our foreign policy. But you know, this is all really under the radar. But it's something I think people should know about. If the American artist Jack Levine once said, "Some things need to be said." And a lot that has gone on since 9/11 has been really suppressed. And one of those things that's really bothered me was the battle at Tora Bora. I don't know how many of you followed the battle at Tora Bora, but when we invaded Afghanistan, Osama bin Laden took a group of 2,000 followers. There were just 2,000 followers left with him in the hills of Tora Bora. And General Tommy Franks and Donald Rumsfeld sent in a team of 75 special forces to capture him. This is a riveting account of this battle by Peter Bergen, who was on the scene in Afghanistan. And it's so amazing because it would have been, if they had sent in more soldiers, it would have been so easy to surround this area. And there's only one road. There's one road that leads from Afghanistan into Pakistan. There's one road. And the question is, why in the world didn't we blockade that road? There was no other way to get into Pakistan because the mountains were so hilly. Why didn't we blockade that road? So the military strategy leaves one completely befuddled. How did they make these decisions to send in 75 special operations soldiers and not to blockade the exit out of the country? And of course he escaped. Bin Laden escaped, and the rest is history. But it's like military strategy 101. I mean, I think any one of us, if we were given the problem of capturing this person, probably could have done a better job than Don Rumsfeld, because he was trying to save money. What was going on there? Was it possible that they were already focused on the next war and didn't want to divert men and materials? And this brings me to the next piece of misinformation foisted on an unsuspecting public, namely, the allegation that Saddam Hussein and bin Laden had some kind of pact to join forces. It's just preposterous to think that a secular socialist like Saddam, a longtime member of the Ba'ath Party, whose slogan is unity, liberty, and socialism, would have anything to do with bin Laden, who hated communists, socialists, civil law, in any society not ruled by Sharia law. But we live in an information vacuum. Our 80 seconds of news around the world don't prepare us for the nuances and complexities of today's world. President Bush was banking on our ignorance to manipulate our fear of the unknown. We believe the allegations because we know nothing about the people of Central Asia or the Middle East. Not only is the public ignorant, how much did Congress know about the ethnic makeup of Iraq before the invasion? It was a fascinating editorial in 2006 in the New York Times by a man named Jeff Stein. It was called, "Can You Tell Sunni from Shiite?" He actually went around Congress polling congressmen, and then he went to the directors of the FBI, and he asked them to describe to them, what's the difference between the Sunni and the Shiite? And most of them couldn't do it. This is 2006. This is 5 years after 9/11. How little was understood about Iraq before we decided to invade? We live in an infotainment vacuum, and the disintegration of another country should not be undertaken out of ignorance. Does greed know no bounds? It's important to know that under Saddam, the oil industry was nationalized. Under the current government, it is open to exploration by international companies. But what has become of the life of the Iraqi people, besieged by ISIS now and other terrorist groups? What kind of decision was made in those days? And was the decision made out of knowledge or out of ignorance? You know, speaking about Central Asia, how much do we know about the part of the world? We have been at war there for 10 or more years. Can anybody name one fact about one group of people who lives there? When was the last time you saw a public interest documentary about Central Asia? Since we've been in war for over 10 years. I can vividly remember the first time I saw a documentary about Afghanistan. It was on the Al Jazeera network. 2 years ago, it was a story about the reconstruction of a music school. The first National Institute of Music, a Dr. Ahmed Sarmast, recruited street children and orphans to teach them both classical music and traditional Afghan music. It was in Kabul. It was very celebratory because the Taliban had banned music from 1996 to 2001. Has anyone else in this room seen a program about the life of the people of Afghanistan? Anyone? Anywhere? You don't count. Very few. Very few. If American broadcast media aren't filling us in on the rest of the world, how about our educational system? In 2004, I was still teaching art in the public schools, and I was horrified when militants attacked a school in Beslan, Russia, killing hundreds of school children. I remember asking my students if they discussed the event in their history classes, and the answer was no. It's not part of the curriculum. My students sent teddy bear drawings and actual teddy bears to Beslan to show these kids solidarity. Don't you think it's time that our kids have some understanding of the contemporary world before they leave middle school or high school? Shouldn't the curriculum of today's students include contemporary current events, as well as world history and American history? How can we stop this decline into an American bubble of mostly local news and Hollywood e-news, where kids know about the lives of movie stars and know nothing about the lives of people around the world? This vacuum was created by our press and our educational system, and it leaves us with leaders who have a very superficial understanding of foreign affairs. What don't we know? And why don't we know it? We fell for very easy answers in Afghanistan and Iraq. What will be the next crisis? Will we be any better informed? I'm going to move on to the next painting, Dusk Railroad. Dusk Railroad is a painting about loss. And it's a painting about the loss of our Constitution. It was influenced by a painting by Edward Hopper called Railroad Sunset. It has an almost identical composition, except for the color and the addition of a watchtower from Delta. When we think of America, the American landscape, we think of Edward Hopper. The reason I used his composition as a structure is that the America that we grew up with is an American ideal that has really been lost over the past 10 years. What has it done to the idea of America when we hold people indefinitely without a trial? The National Defense Authorization Act of 2012, which was passed by Congress, legalized the arrest of terrorism suspects by the military to be held indefinitely. Now, why should the military suddenly arrest people who are criminals? We have a police force. Police arrest criminals. Why does the Army have to get involved? But what's most disturbing about this law isn't that it was signed. What's disturbing is that it wasn't reported that it was signed. That was what's really disturbing. I was waiting and waiting to see if Obama would sign this law. And I found out a week later that he signed it on the internet. So I sent away for dozens of papers to find an article, one article. And I found one article in the Dallas Morning News. So what does that mean? Why didn't we find out about this? When did it become acceptable to the American people to have military arrest criminals and hold them indefinitely without trial? In 2013, the Feinstein-Lee Amendment, which would have explicitly restored trial by jury, was stricken in the new NDAA 2013 bill. Why is that? What's happening to our Constitution? As our constitutional protections slip away, and that's really the point of this painting, we need to heed the warnings of people like William Binney. We've all heard about Edward Snowden. How many people know about William Binney? He preceded Edward Snowden. William Binney tried to warn the American people years ago that we were losing protections of the Fourth Amendment against unreasonable search and seizure. He was the head of Foreign Signals Intelligence for the NSA for 30 years. Right before 9/11, he devised the method of analyzing signals from the internet, foreign internet traffic, to highlight dangerous people through a program called Thin Thread. I love the names of these programs, they're like wild. This program was dismantled by the head of NSA, Michael Hayden, in favor of a much more expensive program called Trailblazer. Thin Thread cost $3 million to set up. Trailblazer cost $4 billion to set up. Trailblazer didn't work. Ultimately, it was discarded. And William Binney resigned in 2002 because he found out that the program he set up, Thin Thread, to analyze foreign intelligence was now going to be turned against the American people, all the American people, criminalizing our entire population. So he tried to warn a lot of people about the illegality of what NSA was doing. He went to Diane Rohr, a legislative aide on the House Intelligence Committee. He filed a secret complaint with the Pentagon's Inspector General. He went to the Department of Defense Inspector General, and all to no avail. He got nowhere. And in February 2007, his house was raided at gunpoint, and so was the house of Diane Rohr. They took away his computers and all his papers. And the question I have is, like, when someone like William Binney, who's so concerned about our Constitution and what's legal in terms of surveillance. When someone like him is raided at gunpoint, where does it leave the rest of us? Like, I feel that he's a patriot. I feel he deserves the Presidential Medal of Freedom, and instead he's being accosted at gunpoint by the FBI and taken in like a common criminal. There's something wrong here. There's something wrong here, and it really behooves us to find out what it is. I'm sure Edward Snowden realized that going through channels, in this case, wasn't going to have the end result of alerting the American people to overwhelming surveillance. Our email, phone conversations, Google searches, Skype calls, Facebook entries. The FISA court, a secret court in Washington, set up to oversee the intelligence community, allows warrantless surveillance of our metadata since the passage of the Protect America Act of 2007. And where does that leave us? The advantage of William Binney's system ThinThread is that he encrypted the personal data of the American people. Letting apathy get the better of us, we could say, I'm innocent. Who cares? I'm not doing anything wrong. What difference does it make? But where will this lead? In 5 years? Or in 10 years? Already our understanding of the term terrorism is getting broader and broader. Animal rights activists who film animal abuse are considered criminal in Iowa, Utah, and Missouri. Last week, in Pasadena, California, a young woman named Jasmine Richards, an organizer for a higher wage of $15 an hour with Black Lives Matter, was arrested and charged with domestic terrorism. $90,000 bail. Isn't that what's wrong? Isn't that the danger of the slippage? Where that one thing goes, and another thing goes, and another thing goes, and suddenly, you know, people who are demonstrating for one thing or another, they're becoming criminalized. As the time goes on and the threat of international terrorism dissipates, the protection of lawful dissent in this country will erode. Lawful dissent. Did anyone else notice military tanks in Ferguson, Missouri? Military tanks were on the streets of Ferguson after the death of the shooting of the black man by the police. You know what are military tanks doing on the streets of America during a civil dispute? That wasn't a mirage. Let's hope it's not the beginning of a national nightmare. Martin Luther had a dream of what America can be. Let's all work to keep that dream alive. Thank you so much for coming.
This wonderful woman in this gallery because I learned so much from her.